Hammurabi. If a citizen has destroyed the eye of one of the citizen status, they shall destroy his eye. So isn't it ironic that the same image of eye appears in both texts? 28. When an ox gores a man or a woman to death, the ox shall be stoned, and its flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be clear. But if the ox has been accustomed to gore in the past, and its owner has been warned but has not kept it in, and it kills a man or a woman, the ox shall be stoned, and its owner put to death. See, there's wisdom in this idea. These things have kind of come into our law. Look at Hammurabi, line 250. If an ox has gored a citizen while going along the road and has occasioned his death, there shall be no penalty attached to this case. Okay? Remember, Hammurabi is 1800 BC. Sinai is like 1250 BC. So the Hebrew law is drawing on a long tradition of laws from ancient cultures. 22. I'm sorry, chapter 22, verse 1. If a man steals an ox or a sheep and kills it or sells it, he shall pay 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. He shall make restitution. This will come to play later this year when we read the story of David and Bathsheba. And we're going to hear how when the prophet doesn't condemn David directly, but talks about a man who took his neighbor's lamb, and David says, he shall replace it fourfold. Okay? And then Nathan says, well, that's you, buddy. We're talking about you and Bathsheba. So, but this is the law that's being invoked by David, the king, when he says in this fictional story that the man who stole the sheep, lamb, shall replace it fourfold. Verse 2. If a thief is found breaking in and is struck so that he dies, there shall be no blood guilt for him. But if the sun has risen upon him, there shall be blood guilt. Blood guilt, again, is this tribal sense that if you offended my family or a member of my family deserves the right to get equal penalty on you. Again, there's no police force, there's no law code, there's no prisons that, their judges were just, 10 old guys in the doorway in the gate of the city. So it's very primitive kind of culture structures compared to what we expect to have. So the point is, if somebody robs your house and in defending your house, you kill him, but it's night, there's no blood guilt. But if you saw him and you know who he was, there was no need for you to murder him. And if you murder him, then there's blood guilt. Follow? I can't tell if you're kind of getting it or... kind of, okay, if you say so. 22:21. Now, I said those were capital cases, huh? That was the second theme. Again, the first theme was slavery, and the second theme was capital. Now we're on to a new theme altogether. And this is a very famous, this is it's under the rubric of social and cultic matters. You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not afflict any widow or orphan. If you do afflict them, and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows, and your children fatherless. Okay, the 3 characters who are the test cases for the justice of a society are widows, orphans, not poor, aliens, not from Mars, but not from your town. Remember, blood guilt, the idea that if you offend a member of my tribe or family, we reserve the right to chase down a member of your family, Hatfields v. McCoy kind of thing going on, huh? But the alien, the refugee, the traveler doesn't have his family with him, does he? There's no threat. We can kill you because your family will never hear about it, and there won't be any blood guilt. So widows, because a woman needed a man to be their public life and to earn a living. Orphans, for obvious reasons. And strangers passing through because they had nobody, no family to take their side. Verse 25. This is, by the way, this is one of the texts that is used a lot in our country's own struggle with what to do with people from other countries in our country who didn't come and go through the process, of legally, huh? So these are the kinds of scripture passages that get, bandied about. 25. If you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be to him as a creditor, and you shall not exact interest from him. If ever you take your neighbor's garment in pledge, you shall restore it to him before the sun goes down, for that is his only covering. It is his mantle for his body. In what else shall he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear. I am compassionate. You don't expect a phrase like that in a law code, but God says, I am compassionate. What we have here is a rule: Jews may not charge interest to Jews. Okay? That was thought to be burdensome. And so Jews were told not to do this. You should not profit by somebody else's loss. If you're in trouble, your crops fail, or your sheep all die, and I lend you money, I should be compassionate like Yahweh is compassionate. This is how, and again, and Christians later tried to imitate much of this Old Testament law. And so in the Middle Ages, Christians had rules that they could not lend money at interest to other Christians. And this is how it is that Jewish families were pressed into becoming bankers. See, I can't lend you money at interest, but I can lend Shirley, who is Jewish, and she can lend it to her at interest. Okay, so there's more to it. There's more to the development of Jewish families as bankers than that, but this is part of it. Huh? You do not charge interest to your own, but you can charge it to others. Okay? 23:2. You shall not follow a multitude to do evil. You can't be part of a crowd. Being part of a crowd does not reduce your responsibility. Nor shall you bear witness in a suit, turning aside from after a multitude so as to pervert justice. Nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his suit. So there is a concern that the poor get the shaft. There's also a concern that you might have a prejudice in behalf of the poor. And the law says, no, you treat everybody equally, everybody the same. Verse 4, if you meet your enemy's ox or his ass going astray, bring it back to him. Your obligation, even to the person who is your enemy, is to assist them with property that wanders off. Verse 10 of chapter 23. For 6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield. But the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, that the poor of your people may eat. Okay, there's two things going on there. This is the injunction of what's called the Sabbath year. That just as human beings deserve every 7th day of rest, the land requires a rest. Now, if you know anything about farming, you know it's a wise thing for farmers to leave land fallow, to not to always be growing things on it. We use land very, very, we use it very severely today. In the Middle Ages, they would always use 1/3. They'd use it for 2 years, and then let it rest, so it could develop again from things growing naturally. So number one is the land deserves a Sabbath. But number two, the poor get to graze on it. And if anything that grows on it, they get to pick. It's not for you. So this is a very primitive beginning of a social security system. That the poor, when land is on Sabbath, anything that's in it that grows can be used by the poor. Okay? Verse 12 says that animals and slaves deserve a Sabbath. Animals deserve a Sabbath, a rest from pulling and carrying. Verse 14 is our first introduction to the calendar. Okay, so now we're into cultic calendar. And you guys should learn these things because they're going to come up a lot this year and in the years to come. The Jewish calendar is much more complicated than this, but this is the beginning. There are 3 feasts. Okay? Unleavened bread, which we know better as Passover. And it's done in the spring for 7 days, and because this is the time you came out of Egypt. Okay? Then, verse 16, the Feast of the Harvest. This is the wheat harvest. All of these things are attached to agriculture. They probably had their origins in agricultural things, and then the historical events were added on top. So, unleavened bread, Passover. It's the first grain crop is barley in that world. So it's the barley harvest. Okay. Now in verse 16, the Feast of Harvest there is the wheat harvest, and it's called the Festival of Weeks. Weeks, W-E-E-K-S. It's 7 weeks after, 50 days after Passover. Pentecost was the Greek word for that. 50th, the 50th day. That's when they commemorated the giving of the law at Sinai. Okay? And then later it follows up, you shall keep the feast of ingathering at the end of the year when you gather in from the field the fruit of your labor. Fruit, that's grapes and olives. That's the festival that Judaism is celebrating pretty soon, coming up. Okay? Or just celebrated it. It's called booths. Thank you, booths. B-O-O-T-H-S. Because as part of it, it's used to commemorate the years in the wilderness where they lived in tents. And so outside a synagogue, they'll build a booth, and Jews are asked to eat a meal if they have their own home booth or they go to the synagogue. Again, if you follow the news, if you're from Eau Claire, maybe you noticed, or Minnesota, there was a synagogue in Duluth that burned, and it was a street person who set fire to the booth. I mean, it's made out of like living things. It's made out of like corn stalks, and then this guy set fire to it, and unfortunately it burned down the whole synagogue. But so those are the 3 main festivals, and they're associated with crops. Passover, unleavened bread. Shavuot, weeks, Sinai, and the festival of booths. Okay, booths. Verse 19. 19, the second half. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Okay, now next month we'll talk more about Jewish diet. But this is a very important rule for Jewish diet. It's from this rule. Now what it's really about, we're not sure. Is it that it just seemed unseemly that you would have veal and then have a glass of milk that was just milk from the mother of that calf? Is it just that kind of a statement? Maybe. But this is why today observant Jews will have milk days or dairy days, and then they'll have meat days. They do not eat meat and milk in the same day. Not even at the same day on different meals. But you either have a milk day or you have a meat day. And you have separate dishes. You have milk dishes or dairy dishes, and you have meat dishes. Silverware and plates and that. So there's not a hint that you're confused and that you violate this. Okay?
So no pepperoni pizza?
No pepperoni pizza. They're very clever. They have like a lot of fish and fruit pizzas. It's really quite good. Don't give it up. Don't